Something similar to like a little pad cushion. What I want to do, I want to put some like pleats, like the equivalent of rolled and pleated interiors, and then kind of compress the wood down to make a, again, what we're looking for here is always is texture. And in the pictures, the cushion, or whatever you want to call it, from the, it looks like it's leather, so it'd probably be a brown or a dark color. I'm not sure I'm going to like the way this looks. I'm trying to make it look like a little rolled and pleated cushion. I'm sure this is not exactly what they had in Spitfires, that's for sure, but this will be a good simulation of a cushion, I hope. By folding up the sandpaper, you can kind of get the edges round. This the best seat cushion I've ever seen is the one in Ski Dombrowski's Lace Maker, that has the rolls and pleats where the pilot sits stretched out. Just exactly how a real one would be. Now what I tried is I took a piece of tubing and tried to cut it back so I could draw this across the wood and see if it would make nice pleats, but it didn't do as well as I thought it would. It kind of roughs them in, but it doesn't really do it as well as it should. The last little thing I wanted to try to see if I could simulate here, no telling if I can or not. I got a little bit of time. I want to see if I can put in some aileron pedals. Now, working off the book to look at, these seem to have the linkage right on the floor. So obviously just making them up out of little pieces of balsa wood. Let's see how they look in the cockpit once they're installed by the seat, trying to picture that. Now this was more time consuming than I really remember it being, putting all the riveting details on the inside of the canopy. And when you look through the glass, obviously you can look in and you'll see the zinc chromate. Again, just one little touch. Something you can easily do. It's not very difficult to do, but it certainly takes time. What I try to do with this is get the epoxy to sit right down at the bottom and then install this using the tip of the XL blade. And I just use another one to just hold it down and take it away. Because if you get it moving around, the epoxy oozes out the edge and then you see an unsightly edge on this. Okay, I think we're about ready to put the glass on. Obviously one of the things I'll want to do is clean it up. I'll make sure it's really clean before I get the epoxy mixed. Now what I'm going to do is use real slow drying epoxy. I really want to have plenty of time to work this, and I'm going to babysit it for an hour or so while I'm doing that. The trick is too, if I had this color green dye, I would put some dye in the epoxy, but I don't have that, so I'll just leave it clear. Fill that little ditch, drop the canopy on and pin it around, and then babysit it while it's drying. Yeah, I'm real happy. Each time I do one of these, and this took just a little less than 2 weeks, I'm always, I don't know, I'm always totally, just one of the things I really enjoy about these models is the cockpit detailing. It's a good idea. This is real slow drying epoxy. It's cold in the shop, so it'll even take longer to set up. Just work it down into the little trough there with a toothpick. Give it plenty of time to set up. And you get one shot with the canopy to get it on straight. You take it up and move it. Usually you smear the epoxy all over the place and it's a mess, but anyway, we'll give this our best shot. And I hope you've picked up some, well, some good ideas on doing a canopy from this tape. Doing this kind of a tape is really It really makes yourself... It takes longer than you ever think it does, and when you're done you say, ah, it wasn't bad at all. Now that I'm here, when I go to look at the beginning of the tape, I'm going to say, ooh, I remember what that was like, not having that canopy on there. Anyway, I fill up this little ditch, I get to drop it on once, and it's going to sit here overnight. Now, the more pins I can put around it while the epoxy is drying, it pushes in little rivets of little like nails around the edge. So I've got as many as I can around there. Gonna let that just sit for the next half an hour or so, 45 minutes. Once that epoxy hardens up, then I can take the pins out. But it's getting near the end of the day, and actually what I want to do, just babysit this for a half hour, come back and work on this tomorrow. Letting it dry overnight's a good investment. Now I let all the epoxy dry overnight, and today what I'm going to do, I'm going to real carefully pull out the pins.
At 3 o'clock I'll be featuring my group of the week. This week's group will be the Chantel.
I'm looking for any spot here, any spot where this is leaking. I want to mix up a drop of 5-minute epoxy and fill a crack, or back here if there's any spot. And boy, I just kept putting pins in and nailing that sucker. You can move the whole plane by the canopy. Because I know the reality is this really does take a beating in time. Anyway, the next step then would be once this, and I see there's a little air space here, there's a couple little spots where I want this to be sealed, because once I start sanding it, I don't want any of the dust getting inside. And then I'll also have to mask off all the areas that'll remain clear before I start sanding on this. I don't know how much of this we're going to do. We're kind of near the end of the tape, but we'll try to get this roughly sanded in anyway today. Get some Brodak primer on it, and then pretty much we're going to be ready to finish the paint work on the plane. And that's something I'm really looking forward to. We're only a month away from flying season, and I want to get going on this. Little things that you may think you don't even have to, it's not even a factor, is pulling the pins out. What I've seen a lot of guys do is they grab the pin with a pair of pliers and take out a chunk of wood or distort the canopy. What I try to do, what's especially nice is these pins that John Pothier sent. They have a little like a handle on them, or the T-pins, where you can, and I just was using up old pins here, so I have some of each, is twist the pin a little bit as you pull it out and kind of unscrew it. And the reason is you don't put a strain on. That wood is kind of thin there. The canopy obviously is thin. Now what happens is everywhere there was a pin, there's a little tiny hole. And what I'm going to do when I take the epoxy, I'm going to heat up some epoxy and just put one little drop down in each one of the holes with a toothpick. And what that does, it acts like little rivets or little staples to even make it stronger. And even though that may seem it may seem like, yeah, wow, that's overkill, my canopy never fell off before. What happens is, what I'm looking for here is a plane that, like some of the planes we've been lucky enough to have 10, 15 years. I think we've got one 17 years old too, still flying. But as the planes get older and older, this is one of the areas that it'll start warping, and you may be subject to having some bubbles or something. And I think just having that rigid there, it also, it's just one of the things that I'd like to maintain. After all that work we did on the canopy, I just hate to see this side of the fuselage warp out or something crazy like that. This is now like a little focal point of the plane, and if we're lucky enough, it'll last in the entire life of the plane without the seat coming loose or without who knows what. In model aviation, everything's a surprise, but that we don't have something that we normally wouldn't have to deal with there. I'm going to take the rest of these pins out and see if I can get these little holes filled in. And maybe I'll even try using a pin and just putting a drop of epoxy down in each hole. They can get a drop of epoxy right down in each one of those holes. That'll really make it solid. Again, I want to be able to pick the plane up by that canopy. Okay, now all the epoxy on the edges is dried. Next step, I'm going to mask off the windows very, very carefully so that as I'm sanding and grinding and priming, I don't get any scratches on the glass at all after all that work Midgley did on that.